The second book of Chronicles, for many, may not be the most exciting book, very easily often forgotten that it's even there. Many will go ahead and spend time reading in the King's narrative and then wonder what's going on with Chronicles, why is it even there? But there's a lot that we can gain from 2 Chronicles if we take a look and to see what's going on with the text. It's a very fascinating text in light of its purpose and history and what it's trying to accomplish in its place and time. The second book of Chronicles is named because it comes after the first book of Chronicles. They are the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. The second Chronicles is going to feature Solomon through Zedekiah. It's going to focus a lot on the building of the first temple, and then things going on with the first temple throughout its existence from the days of Solomon till the days of Zedekiah, and also the things going on with these kings. It's going to focus on the kings of Judah, not the kings of Israel and Judah as seen in 1st and 2nd Kings. If anything, in 1st and 2nd Kings, there's much more focus on the kings of Israel. And so here we at least get more of a perspective and appreciation for a lot of things going on in the days of the kings of Judah, from about something like 960 BC to 586 BC, and some extended things going to about 540 BC. So in Greek, the text is called Second Paralipomenon, or the kind of basically the leftovers, and that's a little much, right? Because there are many of the stories from 1st and 2nd Kings that are written in 2nd Chronicles and preserved in 2nd Chronicles, but it does provide us with a little bit more detail in the story of a lot of these kings. We don't know exactly who the chronicler is. Very likely Ezra, very possibly Ezra. If it's not Ezra, it's still coming from one of those Levitical or priestly circles around the time of Ezra at some point in the wake of the exile and the return. We know that because at the beginning of 1st Chronicles, the genealogies would list all kinds of people that had returned to the land. And so it has that perspective from somewhere around 430 BC. And so this text is being written to Israel in the Second Temple period. When there's already a second temple built and they've returned, this is their opportunity to look back at what was going on in the days of the kings of Judah in the first temple to come to a better understanding of what was going on in those days. And when we look through the narrative here, it'll be important to point out some of the things going on, because the chronicler is trying to make some things very clear in terms of the behavior of the kings and how God reacted to those things. And so we can see how he's trying to make sense of what had happened, but also how what God was doing through these kings at this time. So Second Chronicles begins right at the end of 1st Chronicles. David has passed away, so we now have the establishment of the kingdom under Solomon. And Second Chronicles chapters 1 through 9 very much parallel what you find in the First Kings 3 through 10, basically, where you have the wealth of Solomon in gathering materials for the temple, how the temple gets built, the fact that all the various things that are in the temple, the ark going into the temple, all of the people who are gathered, the dedication of the temple, the commendation of the temple by God, and his approval of the temple, and of course that if the people obey him, it will go well. If they do not obey him, it will not go so well for them. In chapters 8 and 9, we learn about the other exploits of Solomon, his building efforts, the fact that he sent out a coalition to Ophir, and they came back loaded with all these various treasures and things. Queen of Sheba coming to town, the great wealth of Solomon, and then the end of Solomon's reign. The one thing that is not noted in the narrative is what you see in 1 Kings 11, all of the difficulties that attended to some of Solomon's forms of unfaithfulness. So just like in the 1st Chronicles with David, so in 2nd Chronicles with Solomon, there's no interest in going over again the faults and failings of these two kings. It's not that the chronicler would deny them. For the 2nd Samuel and 1st King narratives exist. He's using them. But for his purposes in telling the story, those are not the ones he focuses on. But then starting in chapter 10, we get Rehoboam. And with Rehoboam, there's really no way around it. And he retells the story of how Rehoboam would oppress the northern tribes further, and they all reject him and kind of establish their own kingdom. Then Rehoboam wants to fight, but is held back by the prophets. And this is when whatever faithfulness Rehoboam had is seen to go away. And it's very important that it happens that way, of course, because King Shishak, or Shawshank, Pharaoh of Egypt, comes and attacks, and we find that he basically captures the cities and plunders Jerusalem. This will help explain how Jerusalem, of such great wealth in the days of David and Solomon, is now impoverished in the days of Rehoboam. That by 930 all the wealth is already gone. And we're going to see this as a consistent pattern that once every century or so is a great despoiling or devastating of Jerusalem, which means that even though the kingdom is never going to be that strong, it will never be able to be as great as the Israelites to their north, or the Arameans or the Assyrians. It will always be reset all the time and constantly beset with these difficulties. Rehoboam's end of his rule is therefore also narrated in chapter 11 and 12, and then we learn about Abijah in chapter 13. Very quickly passed over in 1 Kings 15, but here in 2 Chronicles we learn about the war between him and Jeroboam, and how Abijah stood firm in the fact that the temple was of Yahweh was in Jerusalem, and Jeroboam had gone astray in so many ways, and in fact Abijah gained the victory at this time. And then Abijah passes away, and then we have Asa, his son. And King's narrative will have some story about Asa. We get much more here in 2 Chronicles 14. We see that Asa is doing what God approved of. He gets away from some of the idolatrous practices that are already kind of cropped up. He built fortified cities. He had to fight a Cushite. A Cushite force came up, and he had to fight them, and he gained victory against them. And yet, after all that commendation, when the Israelites are harassing him and Baasha is building up cities against him on the border between Israel and Judah, Asa will go and hire the king of Aram to break his treaty with the king of Israel. They're fighting, and so Baasha is withdrawn all of his forces. Asa gets all the stuff that they're using to build up Ramah, and then uses that stuff to build up Geba and Mizpah on the Judean side, or Judite side of that border. And it's a trick. It's kind of creative. It's clever, especially for somebody who is not doing as well in terms of material resources. But the prophets, Hanani prophet, will tell him that because he did it this way and transgressed in this way, the king of Aram has slipped through his fingers. And Asa was angry, put that prophet in jail, and we see that later he'll develop a foot disease, and then he will die. And so we see here very more complex story than what you had in Kings regarding Asa. And that's what you see in Chronicles, is you get a little bit more depth, a little bit more of what the events are going on. And even though there will be the kind of good king, bad king judgments, there's a lot more nuance and flavor. A lot of the good kings, as we're seeing, they have their moments of transgression. And then you have some of the bad kings that we're going to see, and they have their moments of commendation, like we saw with Abijah. But of course, the son of Asa is Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat is a very ambivalent character, even in the Kings narratives from 1 Kings 22 all the way into 2 Kings now, where Jehoshaphat is a king who follows God, right? Follows Yahweh, and he has victory over the Philistines and others. He does try to send out a coalition to Ophir like Solomon did, but it fails, which is kind of showing you the weakness at the time. The chronicler will narrate very much along what you have in 1 Kings 22 about Jehoshaphat's alliance with Ahab at Ramoth Gilead, and Micaiah and the prophets, and how Ahab is going to die in that battle. We see Jehoshaphat appointing judges and getting more military success in chapters 19 and then in chapter 20 against the Edomites and the coalitions that are up against him, the Ammonites and Moabites and whatnot. And eventually Jehoshaphat will pass on. And again, the prophets aren't happy with his alliance with Ahab, but it came out of kind of political necessity. But it will have unfortunate consequences for Judah in the upcoming generation, and that's where the penalty really can be seen. Because after Jehoshaphat is Jehoram. And Jehoram is not someone who is doing very well. He's following the ways of the kings of Israel because he is descended also from Ahab, because he's related to Ahab. He married Ahab's daughter, so because of the alliance that Jehoshaphat had with Ahab. And the Edomites freed themselves at that time. The Philistines and Arabs attacked Judah and swept through it and carried off everything. So again, this is maybe no more than a century since what happened with Shawshank-Shishak, and a century later, again, Judah is wiped out. Jerusalem is plundered thoroughly, and they're now going to have to rebuild and recollect all their wealth. And that's going to be a constant theme here. Jehoram will die, and Azariah will reign after him. Ahaziah is also not very faithful. He is going to die when he's killed by Jehu, when he is there with Joram of Israel, and they're both killed by Jehu, as you can see in the story in 2 Kings chapter 9-10. Athaliah then, of course, takes over. Athaliah tries to kill everybody in the house of David and take over power herself. But one child, Joash is kind of hidden away, and Jehoiada the high priest keeps him until he reaches about 7 or 8. Then he's brought out with the army. Athaliah hears of it, cries out treason. No one really liked Athaliah anyway. Athaliah is killed and buried, and no one was sorry for it. And now Joash is king over Judah in chapters 23 and 24. And while Jehoiada is priest, Jehoash is not only very faithful, but he encourages the repair of the temple, which is spoken of in detail in Chronicles as it is in Kings, and they rebuild the temple with all the wealth that the people have contributed to do so. But once Jehoiada dies, Joash becomes less faithful. He kills Zechariah the prophet, who was rebuking him for it. The Arameans then attacked Joash and invaded and wiped out and plundered the people again. So yet again, we see it not long after what happened to Jehoram, it happens again in the days of Joash. He is killed by a conspiracy. And then Amaziah, his son, reigns after him. And Amaziah is a great indicator of the kind of ambivalence that goes on here when it comes to a king. Amaziah is seen as a king actually who follows God. And at the beginning, he's very dedicated to God. And he killed the conspirators, but nobody else. And then he, establishes his army. And he even hires some mercenaries from Israel in order to fight against the Edomites. But the prophet tells them that they should not be involved in this war. And so he sends them away, even though he paid them. And in fact, they raided cities of Judah because they were mad they weren't able to fight with the Judahites. He then goes and defeats the Edomites. But what does he do? He then takes, in chapter 25, the idols, and he installs them for himself. And he is warned about this, and that it is an ill omen for him, that he is being very foolish. And then he decides he's going to fight the Israelites to the north. And so he challenges Joash of Israel. And Joash warns him about how dumb he's being, but he pursues anyway. And what happens, Amaziah is so thoroughly defeated, he himself is captured. Jerusalem is seized. It is plundered yet again. Its wall is even broken down in parts. And the temple is fully plundered. And so yet again, within maybe a generation or two, we're having another plundering, another reset that's going to require building up wealth and resources again. And this is why Judah is constantly in this state of weakness because of what's going on with their kings. Uzziah, Amaziah's son, reigns for a long time. He will reign for 52 years. There will be an earthquake at this time that is recorded in other places. And Uzziah is faithful, except that then he gets presumptuous and thinks he needs to offer sacrifice. And when he does that, he becomes leprous and is kind of held out because of that. And his son Jotham will begin to reign. And Jotham's a good king and a very low-stated one. He, rebuilds a lot in Jerusalem. He defeats the Ammonites. And everything looks like it's going well, but then his son is Ahaz. And in chapter 28, we see all the debacles of Ahaz and how Ahaz is very faithless to God. Because of that, the Arameans come in and defeat them thoroughly. The Israelites defeat them thoroughly. In fact, all of these kind of Judites are taken away. And it's a prophet that has to go to Pekah, the king of Israel, and tell him, you cannot bring them with you. And they are sent back. And they return to Judah. And because of that, Ahaz in his weakness then appeals to the Assyrians for help. And sure, he gets it. The Tiglath-Pileser comes through and wipes out Aram as a going concern, significantly reduces Israel, but it's going to come at a cost. And that cost is going to be paid by his son, Hezekiah. And Hezekiah will have a lot to say in 2 Chronicles about Hezekiah. In chapter 29 and 30, 31, 32, all are about the reign of Hezekiah. And just like in the King's narrative, so here in 2 Chronicles, we hear about all the consecration of the temple, because again, there's a big focus on that. Hezekiah works to kind of cleanse the temple, to reestablish the appropriate Levites in their appropriate places. He also, of course, they have the Passover that they recognize, and they want to celebrate the Passover in a way that glorifies and honors God. A very important part of the story in chapter 30 is that you have some in Israel who have come and they're unclean. But Hezekiah prays to God for them, and God, even though they're unclean, they're allowed to participate, and God forgives them because of their intent and their desire. And even they want to celebrate and have more of a feast. They want to feast even longer, and they do that, and God is honored by that. And it's an important kind of counterweight to some of the other stories that we see of Uzzah, Nadab, and Abihu. Not that those stories don't exist and don't have lessons, but we also have these lessons as well to keep in mind when it comes to how we recognize God in His service and in our heart and in what it's all about. Of course, then we have the invasion of the Assyrians in 701 because Hezekiah no longer provided tribute. They destroy everything except for Jerusalem. Sennacherib's people speak derogatorily of God and blaspheme, and Hezekiah is preserved. Hezekiah has an illness but is healed from it. You don't have the same story about the Babylonians as you do here because, again, we're focusing on something different. Chapter 33, you get Manasseh and Ammon. And of course, all of Manasseh's sins, which you can find in 2 Kings, are listed. But in the Chronicles version, Manasseh is captured by the Assyrians and while in captivity repents. And he changes his heart and mind. The Prayer of Manasseh was a later book that was written in light of all these that happened. When Manasseh came back, Manasseh tried to clean up all the things that he had done and showed his contrition. Ammon, his son, reigned for a couple of years, was wicked and perished. And then, of course, chapter 34 and 35 is Josiah. And the same stories as in Kings, where Josiah cleanses the temple, finds the book of the law, removes the idolatry from Israel and Judah, laments at how Israel had not followed the law, and the great Passover that Josiah has, the Passover that had not been observed as Josiah observed since the days of Samuel. That doesn't mean that no Passover was observed. I mean, Hezekiah had one. It was just a level of strictness was not maintained for about 400 years. And that's quite the indictment of Israel at that time. But then Josiah dies at the hands of Necho, king of Egypt. And then in chapter 36, you have very quick descriptions of the final few kings. This is extended out far further in Kings in 2 chapters. Here it's a very quick chapter, 2 Chronicles 36. Jehoahaz is made king. Necho takes him away, puts in Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim is taken away by Babylon. Jehoiakim then reigns and is taken away by Nebuchadnezzar. And then Zedekiah is lifted up. Zedekiah rebels. The Babylonians come. They destroy Jerusalem. And they destroy the temple. And everybody is exiled. In Kings, you kind of have an understanding this is coming because you have a message in the days of Manasseh that it was going to happen. You don't have that in Chronicles. In Chronicles, it's all happening, and the kings just continue to go on, and things are going well or poorly, depending on the king. Everything's normal till it isn't. But Chronicles doesn't end the way Kings does. Kings, there's that hope that Jehoiakim is lifted back up. You don't hear about that here. There's no hope for the house of David becoming a senate and reigning as kings as they had before. Instead, you get the decree of Cyrus in the first year of his reign that the Israelites can return to the land and they can, and eventually, of course, they can build a temple there. And so that's the story of Chronicles in the end. This is a story for the Second Temple Jewish people to learn about their heritage, to see what happened to that their people had done in the days of the kings, and how the kings and interacted with God, and how God was pleased or displeased with them at various times, and how everything was the same and normal until it wasn't anymore. But then how the future was them. They were the future. They were the hope that there was going to be a temple again. They were going to be back in the land, and they had become the recipients of this story. And thus ends 2 Chronicles. And interestingly, in a lot of versions of the Hebrew Bible, that end the Hebrew Bible. That at the end of the writings was 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And we can probably hopefully see why. Because for Israel in the Second Temple period, they were persevering. The story of everything that happened before was now their story. And that's how many of the Hebrew Bibles and the Tanakh were presented, and that's something for us to think about as we consider 2 Chronicles and what we can learn from them as Christians and how to glorify and honor God. We're thankful that you joined us. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts about our conversation on 2 Chronicles, please let us know in the comments. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to talk to us directly, if you would like a prayer request, or if you'd like to study the Bible with us, or you'd like to meet with us, please let us know by reaching